Volume 3 Chapter 5. Run away. Crush Lulu was ashamed that this was her first thought. It was a shame that she was sure she would have for the rest of her life. She knew intuitively within a mere second what she should have thought. Save the children. Protect the tribe. Get the elders out. Fight back. But when the toadman raid hit the fissures and as they burst up from the water, immediately skewering two lizardmen through the chest before her eyes, blood splattering into the air like the spray of the swamp water from which the toadman emerged. No, none of the thoughts she should have had came to mind. Only, run away. The toadmen were larger than the lizardmen, half again as tall and broad on average. They were not always stronger, but with their slick and slippery dark green bodies, they were hard to come to grips with. Simply put, they were hard to fight even at equal or greater strength. Their powerful legs allowed them to leap great heights and they had better weapons as well, long javelins they got by trading with Baharuth Empire humans in their part of the swamp. So why are they here? Crush Lulu wondered, and with the alarming thought in her head, she cast her first spell. Fireball. A gout of roaring flame sprang to life in the air and rushed over the swamp water where, by the purest chance, it caught a pocket of gas and a mighty explosion rocked the trees and made the frogmen hesitate. There were many, she saw now. So many. Another impossibility in her mind. Frogmen have villages not much larger than mine. How can this be? The sound of ribbit ribbit, the chortling laughter and the sound of splashing water at her back while she ran away from the shore and through the gate of her village that didn't draw closer. The frogmen's hatred of fire and their brief belief that she had extraordinary magic would not buy her much time. Run, Crush shouted, finding her courage to say what her instincts should have made her say immediately. Run away. Get the children. Get everyone out. A frogman army, she shouted, and two large lizardmen began to force the gate closed. It won't buy much time, moments only. She watched it close and readied her next spell. When the line of burning gas that briefly made the frogmen stop, died down or was extinguished by their own mages, they would be on her village's heels. Splashing lizardmen feet and tails went to and fro. Word spread immediately and warriors gathered at the far gate, ready to make a stand while the rest began to flee. How could there be an army? I've never seen so many frogmen before. Crush felt her blood run like ice and her heart race. Her pale white tail slapped at the swamp water, when she saw a frogman holding a long spear leap into the air. Magic arrow. She shouted and the frog's gut was pierced before it could throw. It fell back, then howled in pain. Crush rushed to the top of the wooden wall when consternation and noise entirely unexpected came from the other side. Beyond the flames stood so many frogmen, like they threatened to drown the water itself with their bodies. Their large, oversized heads and faint up-tilt to their mouths bulged with every heavy breath. But one stood out, broader than any three lizardmen, and taller than any two standing on one another's heads, a frogman lord. Crush realized in dismay. You are the one who killed that one, aren't you? Ribbit, it bellowed at her and held a large orichalcum trident. It pointed to the burning corpse of the frogman that had fallen back into the fires. It wasn't wailing or calling for help at all, it was a roasting corpse. By instinct, Crush nodded. He was my brother, I am Hecate. Frogmother. I was only going to conquer you lizardmen. But to kill my brother so that he would burn in flame? No. You've signed the death warrant for all your people. The lizardmen are going to be destroyed down to the last of your young. The swamp is ours. You have no place in it now. Ribbit. Crush could think of nothing to say. The frogman magic casters were already moving up to deal with the fire. It's only pure luck that they think they're dealing with magic of mine and not just burning gas. That will buy me some time, but they'll figure it out. She stared across the flames that divided the two of them and raising her arm, she pointed at her rival with one claw out. I am Crush Lulu of the Red Eye tribe, and you have made an enemy today. We will meet again, she declared with boldness she didn't really feel, then hopped back down and hissed at the two lizardmen who waited below, go. They raced away to where the little band of warriors waited, and collectively abandoned their home. Where are we supposed to go from here? The one to ask her that wasn't the only one with that question on their mind when they were out of sight of the village. Thankfully they couldn't hear the sound of the plunder happening, all their things, their meager possessions, falling into the hands of the frogman invaders. But they knew that was happening even if they couldn't see it. The question Crush Lulu didn't have a ready answer for. The shame of her initial fear still gripped her heart, and that fear faded not even a little bit when she beheld the massive Hecate, or the sheer size of the opposition which threatened the Red Eye tribe. As they continued splashing through the waters beside the Great Lake, however, just putting distance between themselves and the army, an idea did come to mind. She promised to destroy all lizardmen. I think that means we should visit our neighbors. Search for allies. We'll go to the Green Claws. They're the closest one to us, Crush said, and taking her place at the front of her tribe, she guided them as best she could, hoping against hope that they would listen to her. Zariasu was wading through the water of his fish farm. The warm water lapped at his body and the mud seeped between his scale toes. His tail batted about within the water itself and scattered the fish away from himself. His finger claws worked with practiced deftness at the corner of a pole. It was now routine for him to do this since the project began. I thought I knew fear when I was a traveler. I thought I knew fear during the war. I never knew what fear was till I became a fish farmer. Every night, I wonder what will be broken in the morning. Every day I have to worry that some beast might have devoured my stock and destroyed everything. War and the unknown are brief flashes of fear. This is constant. He sighed and fixed the fraying cord that held the net secure. Zariasu then took up a small twig and began to check each little gap in the net by pressing the twig down, hoping each time to feel resistance so that he would know the net was intact. He rolled his eyes when he recalled how many times he'd screwed up by using his finger claw and snapping the line himself before coming up with the obvious solution of using a twig. It was busy work, and he was still alone in doing it. At least my brother supports me. Zariasu had that comforting thought just as he heard his brother's voice at his back. Hey! Zariasu heard the voice at his back and looked over his shoulder. Shaziryu was waving at him, mouth open and tongue out. He's hungry. Zariasu wanted to laugh about that, but he was focused on his work. He held up a hand behind him with one claw up, telling the chief to wait. He then resumed checking the netting for gaps. The hardest part was checking the ones closest to the bottom, and ensuring there was no gap at the base that the fish could easily wiggle under. For that, he had a number of wooden stakes pinning the net into the muck below so that the net was flush at the bottom, but things could go wrong. The steady flowing water could change the lay of the bottom and create a gap where there was none before, or slowly work a stake loose from its position. The big posts every 20 paces could be easily checked and not easily removed. But the small stakes underwater? Those were harder. He swept his foot over them each time and pressed his weight down just to confirm their placement, and his brother waited patiently on shore. Shaziryu watched his brother go about the work of the farm, and not for the first time admiration for the young lizard man, the bearer of frost pain, rose up in his breast. If I were not chief, he should be. He thought to himself and watched the slow, steady way in which Zariasu worked. Hole by hole, stake by stake, the traveler made his way all around the circuit until he had returned to shore. Zariasu stepped up onto the moist ground and approached his brother. Water dripped from his body and ran down the length of his tail to fall away at the tip, where his brown scales contrasted the green of his brother. Shaziryu kept his eyes on the churning waters. How are the fish coming? Ah, brother. Seeing is believing, Zariasu said, then wading into the water, his hand darted out and broke through the surface of the lake and yanked out a fish by the tail. It flopped around, dangling in his hand. Zariasu's mouth fell open from contented happiness. Bigger. Bigger than what we get from wild harvests, and what's more, I'm selecting them for size. The ones who get the biggest, fastest, are the ones I'm leaving alone. The smaller ones I'm selecting for bait to lure beasts away from these. How are you doing that? Shaziryu asked, looking around the fish farm for some hint that he had overlooked. Zariasu pointed to a space farther away where a number of tree limbs hung over the water. I hang bait from those. It's easy meat and so they avoid the farm. As it turns out, we can also lay ambushes for the beasts themselves that chase the bait, and draw extra meat from those. Shaziryu gave a slow nod of understanding, but looked disappointed when his brother dropped the wiggling fish back into the farm where it swam to what it thought of as safety. The fish, by the way, are so fatty now that they melt in your mouth. They're succulent and juicy down to the last scrap of themselves. I tried a few yesterday just as a test and, well, in another week or two, you'll be the first I gift my harvest to, Zariasu said with enthusiasm and slapped his brother on his shoulder. Shaziryu's tail pounded the ground as it wagged with joy, the heavy thuds giving away his obvious happiness at the promise. Nonsense, you did all this work yourself. All I did was make it possible. I know you argued with the tribe over this, that more than once they wanted to just consume the fish before they were ready. This wouldn't happen without you. Thank you, Zariasu said. Any answer his brother might have given was cut off by the sudden noise of shouting lizardmen, and both brothers turned to face the sound of their villagers calling out for help. Zariasu and his brother rushed toward the noise, the farm forgotten as they came closer to the source of the chaos. What is it? What's happening? Shaziryu bellowed. Red Eyes. It's the Red Eye tribe. All of them. Someone called out from atop the low wall. An attack? Why? Shaziryu shouted the question nobody could have answered, then cast it aside. He stood towering over his fellow lizardmen and pointed toward the back gate. Get the elders, our women, and our children back. Warriors, form up. Gather weapons and put yourselves on the wall. Make ready for a fight. Rallied by their chieftain, Zariasu retrieved Frostpain, then rushed to the wall and took up a place at his side just above the double-doored gate as the Red Eye tribe came closer. And the most beautiful lizard woman he'd ever seen stepped forward as the tribe came to a halt. Please. We need help. We didn't come to fight. She called out. So, brother? What do we do? He asked of Shaziryu, who had no immediate answer. Volume 3 Chapter 6. I'll go talk to them. Zariasu suggested, knowing his mind should have been on his duty to protect his tribe. But that one. That's the most beautiful female I've ever seen. He thought, and all he wanted to do was get closer to her. He didn't wait for his brother to respond, or rather, didn't plan to, but before he could leap over the front, his brother had his finger claws on Zariasu's shoulder. Wait. Don't worry, Zariasu said with a deferential nod. I am a traveler, I can take this risk without hurting the tribe. It will hurt your brother, Shaziryu said in a low, gruff voice when he looked down his long face at his brown-scaled kin. I will be fine, brother, Zariasu said and put his hand over that of his brother. He slowly pulled a touch away. If they wanted to fight, we'd know it by now. We're just being cautious. Shaziryu let his hand be taken away, and Zariasu put a hand on the wooden wall before launching himself over the side. He landed on the soft ground below with a light splash and approached the Red Eye tribe. The sword he kept at his side, Frostpain, the jagged blade of winter ice, one of the great treasures of the lizardmen, drew murmurs from them as he came closer. Zariasu stopped 6 paces away and held his hands open and out at his sides to show he held no weapon. I am Zariasu, traveler and member of the Green Claw tribe. A traveler is the chief? Crush Lulu asked and cocked her head to one side. My brother is the chief, I am his ears for now. Why have you come? Zariasu asked, trying very hard not to immediately utter a mating call and maintain a serious air. They wouldn't be here without reason, if not to fight. Then what? Crush Lulu accepted the answer, raising a hand when some behind her muttered that the chief should have come out. It stilled their tongues and she took a slow breath. Our village was attacked by an army of frogmen. An army? Not a tribe? Zariasu asked, his scaled brow narrowed. No, an army. There were many. Many, led by a female named Hiketi. She was enormous, taller than your walls, and broader than your gates. They vowed to kill us all. We need help. We need. Crush stopped when Zariasu raised his hand. If they want to kill all of you, why should we get involved? Zariasu asked, looking her up and down and then trying to focus on the desperate numbers at her back. No. Not us, my tribe. She intends to kill all of us as in the lizardmen. She wants to take control of the entire lake and the swamp. We have no place in her world. Crush bowed her head. Please, if we don't work together, she will crush us all one by one. There will be no lizardmen. Wait here, I must take this to my chief. I will be back. Zariasu promised, and tried not to appear rushed as he returned to the wall. Frogmen. Dangerous enemies, their powerful legs carry them over forts, their ranged weapons are a problem, though they don't have the strongest magic. They reproduce fast, they could well have an army of their own. When the gate opened a little and closed as soon as he entered, he looked up and called to his brother, Shaziryu, privacy. You need to hear this. The big green lizardman traced a hand over the large scar that ran down the middle of his light tan front. The green scales of his hand caught the light during the act and glinted back up at him. This can't be good, he thought and hopped down onto the soft ground. He followed his brother to his own hut. Their huts, mounted on stilts and raised over the water, covered with grasses and broad leaves that let the air flow freely while also providing shade and warmth, were home. They were not luxurious temples or stone hearths, but they were home. That was all anyone needed them to be. The pair sat, and Zariasu explained what he'd just heard. Shaziryu nodded. I see. A frogman army. Your thoughts? They wouldn't be here if it weren't a problem. We may in fact need the other tribes to deal with this also. A great alliance of tribes. Either we fight them as one or we flee, and where can we go? Zariasu spread his hands open when he asked the question, and watched his brother think that over. Nowhere I can think of. What about you? Shaziryu answered. I traveled much. I saw no place better for us than this one. There are other lakes, but there are other peoples in them. Even if they let us settle, it won't be our old lives anymore, and who is to say they won't simply enslave us? We will be scattered all over, and no two of us will stand together again. We will die out. Zariasu answered with finality. Will the other tribes agree, do you think? Shaziryu replied with a question which Zariasu couldn't quite answer. I don't know, but we can try. But we should also search for help. The frogmen outnumber us in the best of times, and that war we fought against each other didn't help us. Zariasu slumped. We need help. How can you be so sure? Shaziryu asked, a rumble in his throat when he did it. Not to offend your pride as a warrior, brother, but when we fought our war of 6 tribes, did you hear anyone call any gathering of tribes an army? Zariasu asked, and his brother went quiet again. No. But even if the Red Eyes didn't fight in the war, they definitely knew of it, and they might even have seen some of it. They never fled from the threat of invasion by the other tribes, but now here they are. However many frogmen they fled from. It was too many for Red Eyes alone. Zariasu held his breath while his brother, his chief, thought it over. All right. We'll let them in and send word to the other tribes, Shaziryu said and slowly rose to his feet. Zariasu stood up. We need to know more than we do, and I believe we need more than what the Red Eye tribe can tell us. What are you suggesting? Shaziryu asked. We need to strike the frogmen, take prisoners. We need information. How many, what they're after. How they'll do it. And if we can, we need to slow them down. Zariasu replied and reached for Frostpain, his hand wrapped around the hilt of his sword, emphasizing his point. No, first we need the others. Then we can raid the frogmen, Shaziryu said immediately. First I will go with the Red Eye Chief and... No, Zariasu exclaimed. No? Shaziryu replied. Ah, brother. You're our chief. If you go, who will lead us? Zariasu asked, and then he cut his brother off again before an answer could come. If our chief is absent, and their chief is absent, our elders. They are very old-fashioned, they will not treat the Red Eye fairly. They will be suspicious, they may make a mistake and cause infighting instead of unity. I will go, I am a traveler, my loss will not hurt the tribe. Shaziryu looked down at the grass-woven mat flooring. He didn't have to speak his heart. Zariasu understood it. I know. Zariasu replied, but trust me, this is for the best. If a traveler goes, and I take the Red Eye Chief, suspicion will fall. None go to war without their chief. I guess that is true. Shaziryu answered with no small reluctance. Having me here and the Red Eye Chief gone will bring some sense of security that there is no rivalry, and perhaps their chief leaving will convince them that the danger is real. Zariasu suppressed the sudden release of a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. While everything both lizardmen said was true, the truth was, I want to be alone with her. I don't want anyone else to be. His heart pounded at the very thought. Let's go, let them in. Explain things to the Red Eye Chief, and the two of you can take your Hydra and go. You'll make better time that way, Shaziryu commanded, speaking as a chief, only to take a step closer and grab his brother's arm. But come back. Alive. Shaziryu added, speaking not as a chief, but as one brother to another. Minutes later, the gates were opened and the refugees of the Red Eye tribe began to stream into the gate. Fears of invasion faded when the elders of the tribe, as well as their infants and children, began to filter in behind the young and strong. The gravity of the situation began to hit home, hard. Lizardmen faces did not change much, but much could be said for the occasional blink, and there was a great deal of nervous blinking as the many families began to enter, with desperate, hungry looks, growling bellies, frightened, and darting expressions. Cries for food from small lizardmen young were not yet answered when Shaziryu raised his hands overhead to call for silence. The frogmen have an army. They have decreed the extinction of lizardmankind. They have destroyed the village of the Red-Eye tribe, and nobody knows where they will strike next, Shaziryu shouted, and the cries of the Green-Clawed tribe were many. Frogmen were old enemies, and fierce ones when war broke out. Though fighting wasn't common, it happened. Usually when the Baharuth Empire diverts manpower elsewhere and leaves them in control of the area around the swamp. But why would they do that? They've always easily kept the frogmen at bay and confined to the swamp and the Great Lake region. Zariasu couldn't think of an answer to the riddle, and so he waited in silence. My brother will take the Red-Eye Chief with him to the next village, and the next, and the next, and the next. We will have a grand alliance of lizardmen to fight against the frogmen, and with us all together, it is the frogmen who will be destroyed. Shaziryu spoke with more confidence than he felt, but the relieved looks on the Red-Eye refugees said plenty. Each family will host one other until my brother and the Red-Eye Chief return, and we will prepare to fight the frogmen until then, Shaziryu proclaimed, and, weighted down by the heavy news, no mouth nor tongue had the ability to voice an objection. Zariasu approached the albino lizard woman. Come with me, we will be riding on my hydra, and we can't spare a moment. Her tribe looked to her with downcast eyes. I will go with the bearer of frost pain, be at ease, we will come back, I promise you. Crush Lulu said and put a hand over her heart, then bowed lightly with her red eyes briefly shut, and then when she straightened up and they bowed in acknowledgement, she faced Zariasu again. I'm ready, let's go. You're right, we haven't a moment to spare, she said, and to her great relief, the long strides of the brown-scaled lizardman were proof enough that he agreed with her sentiment. Volume 3 Chapter 7. Zariasu went to the hut where Rororo stayed. The four-headed hydra looked at him from all its eyes at once. It could feel his tension and responded immediately. We're going somewhere, my friend. I need your strength, Zariasu said and held up his hand. The hydra's heads took turns pressing themselves into his palm before his body lumbered into the open. Your pet is impressive, Crush said, looking the creature over. He's more my friend and comrade than my pet. I found him a long time ago, abandoned by its mother, most likely over having only 4 heads as opposed to the usual 8. Zariasu explained, and reaching up, he patted the hard brown-scaled body. Rororo's tail wagged back and forth with pleasure at the affectionate touch. Come on, let me help you up and we'll get going, Zariasu said and held out his free hand. We're going to ride him? Is it safe? She asked and looked up at him. The oval-length heads all turned to look at her and cocked in opposing directions as if not quite sure what to make of her. Long serpentine tongues darted out and wiggled briefly in the air before withdrawing into their mouths. As long as you're with me, yes, Zariasu said and patted Rororo again. Listen to me, Rororo, she's a friend, not food. Understand? He asked. The heads bobbed twice in unison, then the big beast held still while Crush Lulu took a hesitant step forward. Zariasu climbed up first, his clawed hands and feet doing seemingly no damage to the monster, not even discomforting it. He was up within the span of a child's breath. His hand extended down toward her again. She tried to imitate him as best she could, and with a little scrambling that brought a tiny blush to her cheeks, she was up sitting in front of him. All right, go, Rororo, Zariasu said and patted the left center head. His hydra turned in that direction and went for the gate. Crush looked behind her to see the members of her tribe beginning to divide up among the families of Zariasu's people. Many of her people looked back at her, but it was noteworthy in her eyes that only one that she saw looked back at the departing Zariasu. She watched until the entire area was a mere dot. Nobody looked to see him leave. Except their chief. Zariasu didn't say very much until Crush began to fidget, straddling the beast and pressed into his body. It was already a trifle discomforting. But the sun was pounding her like a hammer. Strictly speaking, it wasn't even that hot, but this much time unprotected in the sun began to leave its mark. She began to shift. A slight pain began to run through her body. Are you all right? Zariasu asked, glancing down at her from behind. I'm all right. Please don't worry about me. Crush replied with haste, her little blush returning to her cheeks. Her tail went over the side to dangle by and without her intent, caressed his thigh. Rororo continued to tramp through the muck, the The constant splash and squish amidst the waters of the lake and the swamps around it were the only constant noises. Though occasionally there was the rush of wind through the trees or the sound of some creature of the waters breaking the surface for one reason or another. Crush made herself remain still and stiff for as long as she could, and she did her best to ignore it when his body pressed against hers when he leaned forward to tap one of Rororo's necks to guide the beast. It was hard not to notice that Zariasu was there, steady and stable, quiet and focused. I wonder what he's thinking? Probably only about our task. To think my brother almost got to do this. I'm the luckiest lizard man alive. I should be focused on what we need to do. But this is the most beautiful, radiant, desirable female I've ever seen. Zariasu answered that tumult of thoughts and desires by redoubling his focus and remaining steady and slow in every gesture, ensuring not one touch or action of his own could be questioned in her mind. But he did notice when she was shifting again. Have I made you uncomfortable? No, it's. Crush told him the half-truth, and latched onto it by pointing up at the sky toward the bright afternoon sun. It's that, she said and ran one hand over her pure white arm. On this. She didn't look over his shoulder, that felt too awkward. It's that I burn easily in the sun if I'm out too long. Normally I wear a bush cloak to hide my body from the light so I don't get these. She pointed out a series of tiny splotches of red on her body. I burn easily, you see. But unfortunately there simply wasn't time to grab my usual protection. Everything had to be left behind, Crush said with no small unhappiness. Oh, can't you just get another one? He asked and waved a hand toward the dense trees. I'm sure there are plenty of bushes in there, aren't they? Yes, but the bushes that work best are harder to find. The red berry ones are thick and protect me well from the light, but the rest might as well not be there. Crush answered. Why not that? Zariasu suggested, then pointed down at the water's edge. The wind was blowing slow and steady, sending ripples over the waters that caught the light of the burning sun and sent the white reflected light glinting toward their eyes. How can I wear water? Or are you saying I smell? I'm sorry but there was no time to wash before we ran for our lives, Crush said, glaring back at him before he gave his head a fierce shake. No. Don't wear water, and you smell wonderful. Zariasu stopped in mid-sentence. Crush Lulu brought both hands up to the sides of her slightly open mouth. The redness on her cheeks had nothing to do with the heat or rays of the sun above and everything to do with him praising her scent. Zariasu almost said, I didn't mean it. But thought the better of it as that would have sounded too much like going back to saying she stank. What I meant was not that way. I meant. He swallowed and thrust his hand toward the shore again. Wear mud. Cover yourself in that and you'll be protected from the sun. Mud? She narrowed her eyes at him. Yes, mud. It isn't perfect, but coating yourself in it will cover your body so that you don't burn. Zariasu tried to stay as practical as possible and did not meet her narrow gaze. I suppose. But it would be difficult to get on my back. Crush Lulu remarked. I'll help. Zariasu offered, and her tail lashed reflexively. Is that an offer you make to many females? Some way to excuse putting your hands all over them? Crush inquired, almost as curious as she was embarrassed. No. That isn't. I'm just trying to solve your problem, Zariasu stammered. So you find my body repugnant, do you? That is a common sentiment. Few would want to touch scales like this. Crush replied, only for his vigorous headshake to redouble. Certainly not. I would love to touch your body. It's beautiful. You're the most beautiful female I've ever seen, and Zariasu replied, and both he and Crush Lulu sucked in air in disbelief at the bold statement. Rororo, however, ignored it all and simply jogged along. So you are a pervert who wants my body after all? Crush Lulu demanded. No. Yes. Zariasu darted his eyes about like he was seeking an escape. Which is it? Crush asked. With nowhere to go verbally or physically, like some deep primal call from the depths of his soul, the female of his dreams before him as they rode on an errand of desperation that could very well fail and doom them all, his body did the one thing it did not need to think to do. His powerful hands gripped her shoulders, claws lightly pressing into the white scales, his back arched close to her, his head tilted toward the sky and tail stiffened out behind him. Then from his open mouth, ah, 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 ah. The high-pitched noise was nonsensical to anyone outside their race. It was not even a word within their spoken tongue. It was a mating call of lizard man to lizard woman, the most primal expression of desire and want their kind could emit. WHWHWHWHWH what? What did you do? Crush blushed a deep crimson over her cheeks and looked up behind herself. He did it again. There was no doubt in her mind. A mating call. I never thought I would hear one for myself. Crush's tail began to flail about and pound his leg, while Rororo simply rode on. You can't mean it, she said, but he nodded. I do. I can't deny the depths of my heart. As soon as I saw you, I hungered for you, I wanted you. You are the most beautiful female of our kind that I have ever seen. And I cannot help myself. We will die if we fail, and we may even be killed trying to win over our neighbors. If we are going to die, I want to live honestly, and make my desire known to the woman I love. Zariasu proclaimed, and it did nothing to quell Crush Lulu's blush. We don't even know one another, she exclaimed. You led your people to safety and put yourself at the front, risking death by doing so. That tells me you are a female among females, the greatest of your tribe. Anything else I am content to learn later. Zariasu answered her with confidence. For seconds she could think of nothing to say, but she did finally come to ask. So the mud suggestion, was that just so that you could touch me? No. That was to protect you from the sun. That I would get to touch your body is only an added privilege that I would greatly treasure. Zariasu answered and Crush fell silent again.